Good morning. Welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. And today I'm excited to be here with Emma Tupper, the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Moxie Media. She has worked there since 2010, started in an entry level position, wasn't really even sure she was going to stay in that position, wasn't even sure she was going to stay in politics. Which doesn't surprise me because I'm not really sure I'm ever going to stay. Well, I'm not going to ever be a candidate again. I'm sure of that. But I'm excited to have her because then she grew with the company. She ultimately became a partner of the company. And in her tenure over the course of time, the company has helped elect nearly over 270 women, which is really what we need in politics. I like to say women bring life to the world and men just bring death and destruction to the world. So we're just seeing that more than ever now. So I would just like to see lots of women elected and just see. I was always hoping there would be a woman president someday, not
I
necessarily
know.
Hillary Clinton, but I would like to see a woman president someday. I'm ready for that. But tell us your story before I go on my tangents. But jump right
Yeah.
in.
Well, it's so great to meet you and be here. Let's see. I got my start in politics in 2006. So 20 years ago, I worked as a field organizer on a ballot measure working to repeal an abortion ban that had been passed by the state legislature in South Dakota. That experience really, I think, made me an idealist in this space because every my job basically was to talk to voters every single day at the doors and on the phone. And I think because of that and because of the win that we had in November, I saw firsthand how good it felt, A, to just make an impact, a positive impact. Like I could come away from that experience knowing that we made real change in people's lives, and B, that the work that I did in talking directly to people and having difficult conversations, not everyone wants to sit down and let's say most people don't want to sit down and talk about abortion, particularly in South Dakota. It was just culturally not something that people were really comfortable with. But being able to sort of make change by having real in person direct conversations with voters, I think really helped me see the power of that work of connecting one on one with people.
And like you said, do you mostly work in South Dakota? Where does your Moxie Media? How far does their reach
Yeah.
go?
Moxie was founded in Seattle, which is where I grew up, but we are now, we, for a long time, for over 15 years, have been a national firm. So we work across the country. Since the pandemic went sort of fully remote, and now our team is everywhere. I'm actually in Chicago now, but we've got folks in every time zone. So we work across the country, predominantly in battleground states and districts where there's sort of a lot more on the line.
Right. So so if you were to look at the presidential system here in America, right? When you go red and blue, you look at it, you see both candidates are going to wind up with 240 electoral votes. That's the way it works, right? So battleground states, just like you said, the seven swing states are the ones that are going to put the president over the top.
Mhm.
So when you're there, when you've got this candidate, just say we go to Trump Biden thing, okay? How do you what's the first thing you do for them to help them in those seven states?
Well, my firm specializes in direct mail, and so the work that we're brought in to do, is really in the sort of print media space. And we're typically working in concert with other folks who do TV and digital. Often those are sort of combined. The work that we do really when we're first brought in on a campaign, and this is informed by my experience of sort of one on one individual conversations, is to ground ourselves in who the audience is. I think what I've seen in the last 20 years is the ballooning of money in politics has created a real sort of emphasis on mass production and treating voters as data points and targets and not as humans. And so the work that I do when I'm starting with a candidate is to really understand their district and the people in their district so that the strategic decisions we make flow from there. And to ground our work, not just the messaging and the targeting, which are sort of typically thought of like the big strategic pieces of a paid communications program, but for direct mail, like the texture of the paper, the way that it opens, the palettes, the design of the photography, that there's sort of a human touch that is informed by the people who are going to be receiving it.
Right. So then when you get with the candidate, you get to know him, right? What if that candidate really doesn't relate to the pulse of that district? Would you ever tell him that or her?
I think you're having sort of difficult conversations with candidates often about, I think of it as like the sort of small p politics. Like the majority of a person's campaign, you could campaign for a year and a half, and most people are not going to tune in to what you're doing, right? The people who are paying attention are pundits, political insiders, donors. Voters don't really tune in until a couple weeks before an election. And the sort of decisions that have to get made to get to the point where voters are hearing from you are really impactful. And often we're having to make some trade-offs about how you talk about yourself and the district. I think having sort of truth talking with candidates is really important. And can be kind of difficult, right? Because people, I think particularly folks who run for office, I think a common pitfall I see is sort of wanting to be surrounded by people who agree with you. And what I find really important and impactful in a campaign is when there's some tension about the decision making, some disagreement, so that we can really see things from multiple angles.
So when it comes down to the decision making, if the candidate says we really got this, and you know they really don't have it, do you ever just cut ties with them, or do you keep trying to work with them?
We have certainly cut ties with folks in the past. Typically, that is a result of, I think, boundaries being crossed in terms of respect for our team. If a candidate really feels like they're not listening to the advice that we're taking or we're giving, I do think we sort of downshift in terms of the way that we're showing up, because it's just, at a certain point, it's not worth kind of continuing to have the same conversation over and over again if you're not going to follow the guidance.
Right. So this is the question I'm leading to. What is the connection? And of course, you have never worked with him, but what is the connection with Donald Trump? What is this feeling? There are people who say, I have TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. I say, no, I have TSDS, Trump supported derangement syndrome. I don't understand the connection. I don't understand this. Is it because he's just the guy that's doing everything different and that's what everybody wanted, or just something different? I mean, is that something you advise your candidates to do, is just do something and say something really stupid and see how it resonates?
I mean, I think Trump is a sort of one in a generation kind of political talent. And I think you have to look at him as talented. As a Democrat, it's hard to say that, right? Because you kind of don't, it often looks like a complete mess and chaos. And I think that's how a lot of people feel. But I do think what he does is incredibly differentiating and distinct from other candidates. And we've really struggled to put up people against him who I think can sort of zig where he zags. And I also think it is sort of a bad idea for candidates for office to try and learn too much from what he does, because I think what he does is very inherent and unique to him. So no, I'm not advising candidates to say crazy stuff and try to upset the sort of typical way things are done in exactly the same ways that he does. But I do think, and we work with a lot of sort of outsider anti-establishment candidates, I do think coming to the table with some serious contrast with your opponents is really important. And I think in 24, what we saw with a lot of Democratic candidates was kind of moving to the middle, trying to be the thing that every voter would like. And what you end up doing when that happens is really, I think, watering down your message. I think we have to accept that if we say something from a strong values point or from a strong perspective, a certain number of people are just going to disagree with you. And that's okay. We can't be the thing for every single person.
Right. But when you say if Democrats try, just say your candidates try to move to the middle, and it could work, but not necessarily very well. But then you got the idea of it. Does that mean every Democrat has to be a progressive or a kid? Because I'm a middle of the road guy. I'm
Yeah.
center right. Really, I'm not just a middle of the road.
Yeah.
I'm center right. I'm like, I don't. I really thought, and I'm just thinking out loud now, Bernie Sanders and 20 million young people saying he's the greatest. I really thought 20 million young people gave up on the American dream right at that moment in
Yeah.
time. And it was really disheartening to think, but guy saying I'm a socialist. I look at, I think his name is Tyler Durkin running for Senate, Texas, and everybody's like, he's going to flip Texas. And I'm pretty much like, I don't really see Texas flipping, but that's okay because I heard it from Hillary Clinton. I was like, you're idiots. So at least I'm not saying you're idiots. He has a chance. But again, you're bashing billionaires. And how many Americans really deep down in their heart want to be a billionaire? Is it really that bad to say, I really want to succeed in a big way?
I think I'm not sort of suggesting folks, particularly, I mean, it really depends on the political environment you're running in. So I don't think running as a progressive versus a moderate Democrat it really depends on where we're working. So there's not like a one thing that works in every state and every district with every candidate. I do think that when we talk about the political spectrum, what we are missing is, again, connecting directly with people about the issues that they care about. And maybe it's not attacking billionaires, but I do think that there's a real frustration with corruption. I think there's a real frustration with a system that's not working for people, a real frustration with a system that just plain doesn't work. I mean, we can't get anything done. And at the same time, life is getting harder and harder for people. And I think candidates who can credibly speak to people directly about the issues that are most impacting them will find the most success.
So here's my question. When we talk about corruption, right, then there comes the giant hypocrisy. Like Donald Trump is the ultimate of all corrupt in some Democrats' eyes, right? But I always point out, and this is where at one time somebody asked Pete Hegseth about Donald Trump falling asleep in meetings. And then they said, why didn't you ever ask about Biden? And on the national debate, he looked like he was just really not doing well. And then the White House came out with a formal statement after 9 p.m. He spent. And it's like, well, we really need a commander in chief that can really pick up the phone at 2 a.m. and be completely coherent. This is a little concerning that you're suddenly giving us this revelation that he clocks out at 9 o'clock. So the hypocrisies run wild, right? No, then comes, like, I point out the Obama thing. Okay, President Obama ran on the contention that the Unger House, which is a house in the Cayman Islands that houses thousands of corporations for tax evasion, he said it's the biggest scam in the world. Becomes president, and he nominates Jack Lew and Timothy Guy to run the Treasury Department. So he puts two foxes in charge of the hen. This is his campaign. We got the biggest scam in the world going, and I'm going to continue it with these two guys, and we're going to keep it even, make it better and bigger. So the hypocrisy goes, like you pointed out, the corruption. So let's just say when you get a local candidate and you're telling him the corruption is an issue, how does he really convey it to the people how would you do a messaging, a mailing that says he's different?
Yeah. I think it really starts with an understanding of kind of who's supporting a candidate and where their money is coming from. And so candidates are increasingly rejecting corporate PAC money, but not just corporate PACs aren't really investing in a lot of challenger races generally. So that's sort of an empty promise. What I think is important is to really understand where special interest money is flowing and what that communicates about the candidate. And in terms of sort of how we do the sort of craft of a direct mail piece that's really communicating anti-corruption, a lot of it is generally in sort of getting really specific about what that actually means for voters. So again, I think we sort of often rely on things like a no corporate PAC pledge to differentiate. And I think what we need to sort of steer towards is real specifics about what it actually means to be someone who will take fighting corruption seriously. Get specific, get clear, get direct. I think typically what we see in political communication, and this is why people get really turned off by it is platitudes, empty promises, things that people say over and over again in every district across the country. How are you specifically as a candidate going to actually stand up to corruption? What are you going to do? How are you going to lead this fight nationally?
And you're able to convey that message when you get a candidate. When you get a candidate reaches out to Emma and says, you can convey that message in mailings, right?
I mean, we are trying to, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think it's doing the work that we do is there are certain things that we can control for and other things we can't. We can control the way a piece looks. We can't control how it's received in the editing process, where it ultimately ends up. And we can't necessarily, like, there's just sometimes it clicks with a candidate and sometimes it doesn't. And I think the other thing we see is some candidates who are willing to take bigger risks and others that aren't. And we're always trying to kind of push them towards taking risks that feel safe in messaging and design. But it doesn't always, we don't always have people who, yeah.
So when you get a candidate that comes to you, what would you say is the ballpark figure he needs to start with? Oh, let's start with the size of a campaign, like a local school board, like a school board, education board, running for on the board.
I mean, it really depends. And it's hard to put sort of a number on it because it would depend on like how many people are running. Is it an open primary? Is it a highly informed electorate, or do we need to talk to a lot of people about the campaign and what's at stake this year? So it's hard to say. I would say typically for a serious direct mail budget, a candidate probably at a local level needs to have at least 50,000 to have enough reach and enough repetition. And so direct mail is often not necessarily the right tool for every candidate.
But it is really, I feel like it's getting to be a more and more effective tool because it's actually the one candidates are using less and less. They're really using social media a lot, which I don't think is an effective tool. But
yeah. I mean, I think we're so driven by algorithms now and short little clips of videos. I was reading an interesting article about how like our politics is moving to like back to orality. And I think that feels real. Like people are getting their information in kind of these siloed sound bites. And direct mail is confronting. It's like in your home, in your personal space, and we can target a very specific voter. And so I think we're seeing, since I started in direct mail, people have been talking about how it's going to go away because it feels like such an old school medium. And I think we're now starting to see people really consider it as an important piece of a paid program.
yeah, I don't think it's going away at all, actually. The thing is, I think it should, my point is really, more candidates should believe in it more than ever because I think it's more effective than ever. Now, like, just like you said, the local candidate that's really trying to make an impact on social media isn't going to have the impact he's hoping to make.
Yeah.
He's not. But if a letter hits the mail or a direct piece hits the mail, it really explains him as a person. But then comes the hard part, right? Is it best to follow up with knocking on the doors? Is it best to? So that's the hard part is when they really got to hit 200 doors a day and to the challenge because the mail hits the door. If the mail hits and they hit the door, that's really what works now. But
yeah.
And I'm excited about that because I think really the movement is in America that more and more young people are engaged more and more than ever. That's where the belief comes into social media. I still think the direct mail, young people look at the direct mail too.
Yeah, I just think they don't look at it as frequently. I live in an apartment complex. I don't check my mail every single day. I think the quality of what we're sending needs to be really leveled up. And so, again, really putting the experience of the human receiving the mail front of mind when we are designing programs is really important. The cadence, if you're sending to a young person, a lot of campaigns are sending upwards of 10 to 20 flights of mail. When that's happening on both sides and there's independent expenditures coming in as well, you end up with an overwhelming amount of communication that is really hard to sift through. And so it becomes really critical to have a piece that can sort of stand out from all of the rest of the stuff that people are getting. We think a lot about not wanting a piece to look like you could slot any other candidate on it, because if that is what we're doing, it's not going to cut through. It's just going to be ignored. I think often the people doing political advertising don't actually live in places where you are that sort of swing district targeted voter. And so trying to get your head into that person's mind is really important as we're designing the work.
Right. And then communicating something that's very specific to that community.
Yes,
And you're
yeah,
really onto something, right? Like if it's childcare and it's really in that one piece, like you know you're in a community where single moms really need some help with childcare, and you put that in that piece, you're really going to connect with them.
right. Yeah.
And then comes there's an example of when Barack Obama was president. He was actually very popular. Really, for me, I thought he was articulate, he was intelligent, which is really something we're missing these days, right? So, just not to be condescending in any way, shape, or form, we really are missing that these days. But during that time, he got things done. I mean, he did get healthcare reformed. Whether you like the reform or not, it was like no one thought it could even be done at this level, right? But during that time, his 8 years in office, Democrats lost 1,200 seats locally, local seats, school boards, dog catchers, whatever you want to call them, right? Was it a matter of we didn't have candidates? Was it a matter of we didn't have the right approach? Would the right approach been if those 1,200 candidates used direct mailing? Would that have been, do we know what happened there?
I mean, gosh, that feels like such a distant memory. I joined Moxie in 2010, so right kind of in the middle of the sort of Tea Party, I don't know, revolution, whatever you want to call that. I think culturally there was a really strong backlash to what the Democrats were doing. I also think just historically, like a sitting president will always struggle with popularity, and midterms get really challenging for the president's party. You can see that happening throughout 2025 and into 2026, where in special elections, Republicans are losing in areas that they would have won if Trump were on the ballot. And it's not like it's going to be a slam dunk in 2020 in the midterm elections at all, but I think there's a strong consensus that Democrats are well positioned to at least take the House.
And possibly the Senate, right?
Yep.
So now here's the thing. Are you busier than ever for is 2026 going to be your banner year?
It feels really busy. And I think part of that is because with redistricting looming, with a Senate map that gets harder and harder, this feels like a really crucial year for Democrats to expand, to build majorities in both the House and the Senate, but also in state legislatures across the country and in gubernatorial races across the country. I think people want to really capitalize on the momentum that is being felt right now and hopefully put enough of a majority on the table that it gets harder to chip away at.
But when you say chip away, that's a good term to use. What do they need to do to really not be concerned with that? Okay, if they get this power in 2026, it's only good for 2 years. Then are they going to look at it like, because I remember the midterms during Biden, and he looked like it was his personal success story, and it's like, it's really not. It has to do with abortion, which you had nothing to do with. Right. And they all took everything for granted. So I always tend to see when you give the Democrats this hope, it's like giving the Dolphins this hope. They're not going to the Super Bowl. I'm telling you now. I'm not a sports guy 100%, but I can assure you they're not going to the Super Bowl. But is it this sense of enthusiasm, this sense of, it's a delusional feeling I get from Democrats that they really think they're onto something, and you're really not. You still haven't created an agenda. All you do is beat back the guy that everybody hates, which really generally isn't that hard to do. And you haven't done it well.
Yeah, I mean, like historic low approval ratings of the Democratic Party. It's not that people are voting, and this is a real challenge in elections. And I think for the last decade, it's the work that we have done has really been in opposition to Trump. And we have to shift to a positive, forward-looking vision of the kind of country we want to see. I think the challenge you see in the Democratic Party, and I'm really not like a pundit here, but from my perspective, like we just don't, there's a broad spectrum of kind of where people want the direction of the party to go. And so I do think the presidential primary in 28, leading up to 28, will help, I think, coalesce around a vision. I think we just lack some leadership and, to your point, an agenda that people are excited to vote for.
Right. Like, I've never seen an excitement for Democrats. Generally, what I see is an excitement to see Trump in jail, which is never going to happen. But it's just, again, it's like the Dolphins going to the Super Bowl. These things are not going to happen, right? But then comes the time where is there ever this, depending on even your candidates that are coming to you, do you ever feel like it's just this whole beat a dead horse thing, or they really got something to offer? Do you ever feel like that?
I like a lot of the candidates we work for have real clear vision and they have things that they want to accomplish. And there are a fair amount that are recruited to run for office who get talked into it and are genuinely like good, decent people who are just going to struggle to like figure out what their message is, because it's not necessarily coming from a place of, I don't know, I'm sort of struggling to come up with sort of the word, but people often get sort of talked into office and don't necessarily have like a real clear agenda that they want to pass and not while they're in office. And so there is some sort of back and forth in trying to figure out like, well, what is it? Why are you running? What is the point of this? And that's often one of the first conversations that we'll have with a candidate.
Well, that's a really good thing that you have that conversation. I can tell you, Democrats, I've heard from a lot of Democrats, and their new agenda is a candidate in every
Yeah.
a candidate in every, what do you call it right now? Like every election process. Like,
Yeah.
so, and it's like, and they are really recruiting hard. Like, they were trying to convince me to run for the school board, and I'm like,
Yeah.
the school board only does budgeting. I am not a numbers guy. I love education. I would love to talk about curriculum, but all they do is allocate funds and eminent domain and stuff like that. That's not my thing. So you're really recruiting the wrong guy. And then, but they're like, we just need you running because we have nobody else. And it means that only a Republican will run, and then that Republican will win. Well, this is no plan. This is really not a good, like, if we go to war with like that, like, we just need you to show up in the battlefield. We won't train you. We won't tell you what you're getting into. It's not really a good plan. So is there ever that hope of that changing for the Democrats?
I mean, I think it comes from a place of, I think really starting with Trump's first election, the target persuadable voter is a very specific, narrow swath of the electorate. You'll hear this a lot. Persuasion is increasingly more challenging. People are just like, I'm team blue or I'm team red. And there are very few people that you can persuade one way or the other. And so I think Democrats have really tried to narrow their focus on the sort of small group of people that are persuadable in a small swath of districts that are swingable. And what we have done is we've really lost our presence in huge portions of the country because we don't have credible candidates running. And I think that's a problem. And so I do think that the sort of recruiting someone to run in every district, like compete everywhere, is driven by a desire to reestablish sort of organizing work on the ground across the country in ways that we have sort of overlooked, in places we've overlooked in the past. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad strategy, but I think to your point, we can't just like recruit someone for an office and let them sort of leave them to figure it out. There need to be some tools to sort of help people figure out how to run and win and be effective, not just in the campaign, but in governing as well. And it really varies state by state. I mean, the state parties often are playing a big role in that, but that infrastructure is very different from state to state.
Right. So would you say this is just me and you kind of thinking out loud at this point? Because I know your business is very specific, but so I went to Democrat candidate school, right? So there's breakout rooms. So there may have been Emma talking about direct mail. There may have been the next person talking about fundraising. There may have been another breakout room talking about GoTV. Basically, all we're talking about is winning.
Right.
Would it make more sense to talk to candidates about what they're running for, what they would be interested in, what they're
Yeah.
getting themselves into? Like when I was out there, and that's why I say I'll never be a candidate again. I was out there all the time, spinning my wheels, right? I got a call from my 5-year-old, when are you coming home? And I was like, I'm coming home right now. And we went and draw, and I realized this just isn't for me. This isn't my
Yeah.
thing. I'm really spending a lot of time on something that really, it's not working.
Yeah.
It would it be great to just tell people this is what you're getting yourself into. 16 hours a
Yeah.
day. Some people are gonna like one guy, like I thought he was gonna drive over me on the way out of in front. I was in front of the DMV getting signatures. I thought he was literally running his car to come and get me. It was really strange because he actually stopped his car, took my clipboard, and filled out the petition for me to be on the ballot. He goes, "At least you're trying," which wasn't really what I thought was his intention. The way he was driving. That's okay. It worked out. I didn't get run over, but you don't know what you're getting into, and you don't,
Yeah.
and they don't tell you anything. I remember one time I was in a meeting with, and it seemed like Democrats, it was more Republicans. I said, "What's the difference?" I said, "Generally, Democrats are the champion the vulnerable. Republicans try to see to it there's a lot more vulnerable." It was really the wrong thing to say in that environment. You got to be prepared for that as well. You don't really know when you're going to stick your foot in your mouth. And these are all things we should be preparing candidates for, rather than just telling them, "We need you in this. We need you in this. We need you to have skin in this game. We need you to run for this office." And
Yeah.
it's not, for me, I think it's a good approach if you at least prepare them somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we often will come on board to a first time candidate's campaign and they've been recruited, and particularly working with women candidates. We've done a lot of work with Emily's List, and one of the things they'll say is, I can't remember the exact, like a woman needs to be asked like 7 times to run for office before she'll actually agree to do it. And so a lot of that campaign was like just making the ask over and over again. And what you end up with is candidates who have sort of been they've had conversations about the support they would get. And then if they run into roadblocks and that support goes away, it can, I think, be a real shock to candidates. And so just things like how much call time depending on what you're running for, call time, like fundraising call time, which is across the board the most hated aspect of running a political campaign. How much time you're going to have to spend doing that week by week and really preparing candidates for how grueling that would be. Like, I think it is hard to have the recruitment conversation and a truthful conversation about the challenges of running for office. And I think to your point, we could probably thread that needle a lot better.
But if we never do, are we really missing the point? Are we really missing the mark? Because I feel like, truthfully, I feel like Republicans are more dedicated. Donald Trump said it best. If it was easier to vote, we'd never win an election. I mean, really, truthfully, Republicans are more dedicated. When you say, I always say women should be, when you say you need to ask them 7 times, men just like, oh yeah, it sounds like it's a great idea. It's better to be prepared. It's better. The sale begins.
Yeah.
No, but at least they know enough to say no, at least to start.
Yeah.
It's not for me. But whereas I really thought it was for me, and that's a typical man. It's gonna be fun. I'm gonna meet lots of people, and it really sucked. And so that's the thing we should tell people is you're getting into something you've never even imagined before.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like the conversation about how hard it is. I think to your point earlier, the conversation about like what are you trying to achieve here? Like what's the reason? Why are you the right person for this district? Why you and not anybody else? And then I think, I mean, one of the things on my mind a lot is like a successful campaign doesn't necessarily set someone up to be a successful legislator or executive. Like that transition, which I'm not really a part of because I'm not working on the official side, I think is a whole other thing that candidates are not prepared for.
Right, but at least when they get in that, I think there's that old story of when like just say a House member gets elected. Granted, it's a big deal to be elected to the U.S. House, but the first thing it's like being in prison. You get cornered by the big boys, and they say we just need you to sit in your chair and vote what we tell you to vote. And then they realize that's what's wrong with America, truthfully. And then they say, and now you got to go across the street to a building that's not owned by the feds and sit on the phone again and raise money. If you ever want a committee position, you got to raise a lot of money. That's what's wrong with American politics. You can't really put that in their heads and all the other stuff in their heads and then say, hey, you want to run? Because you got to kind of leave some of those details out. But some details we got to include in some details we got to include in. We got to prepare people better. But I think you're doing a great job of what you're doing. And I don't think it's your job to convince people to run or not run. If they're really interested in running and they're really willing to sign a contract with you, they seem like they're genuine for the most part. Like, they let them throw caution to the wind and jump in. But the reality is, as far as I'm concerned, the Democrats need to do so many things so much better. We keep looking at Gavin Newsom as like the guy for 2026, and I'm like, I don't think he's the one we want to be our candidate. I'm just a little concerned about these prospects because he's a little bit older, a little bit good looking, really articulate, but it's really not working in my eyes. And
I think the primary for the Democratic nomination will be robust. I think there will be a lot of very interesting people in that primary. I'm excited just to see what happens. And I think there's some talent out there that we're not even thinking about that could come on the scene and I think really add value. I do think as a party that will be, my hope, I guess, is that it will be a positive experience and really help sort of move us down the field in terms of how we're positioning with voters.
Yeah. So you weren't directly with the abortion piece. It was really your first wheelhouse, right? And here's my question. So I don't even know how true it was. Allegedly at the Democratic convention, there was an abortion van in the parking lot somewhere, and they were doing abortions. I don't know if that was true or not. But is it time at this point to revisit the subject's going to be really hard. And when we're looking at the structure of the Supreme Court, it's not going to work, right? So then we talk about codifying the right of a woman to abortion. Is it time we at least step off that conversation for now? Is it time we pick our battles a little better?
I think for a long time, and I don't think there was a ban doing abortions at the DNC.
I was just saying, that was the emails I was getting, but
I think abortion rights is often a really serious litmus test because I think it speaks to really core, I think, American values around freedom and liberty. And so, and in particular for many persuadable voters who are often women and mothers, that it is sort of an indicator of a candidate who respects me, my body, and my freedom.
Decision.
Yeah.
You're right to make that decision.
I think that it is also often sort of when we look at doing polling in a House race or a state legislative race and you're doing an issue battery, what are the issues you care most about? Often abortion is at the top of that list. I think what we miss in that assessment is sort of the intensity of the importance of that issue and whether or not that issue priority is actually driving decision making in the election. And so some polling analysis can kind of get at that, but it's hard. If someone's telling you abortion's my top issue and that's the top testing message, then a candidate often thinks, well, I need to run on abortion. And I think that if we can, I think you will see Democrats this cycle sort of moving away from that as like the most important message that they run against a Republican on, and really focusing on sort of economic issues that people are facing. That is certainly the biggest challenge for folks in many of the swing districts and battleground states. And so I think we will see Democrats moving away from it, but it is, I think, an indicator of extremism in a real way that is impacting people's daily lives.
It absolutely is. I totally agree with you. The only thing I wonder is when it is at the top of the issue, it goes both ways. The top of the issue is on both sides. Both.
Yeah.
So that's why I just thought maybe Democrats. I remember Robert Gates was the defense secretary for Bush, and then Obama kept him on, right? And I remember at his exit interview when they released their prisoner, he was really ready to retire during Bush's tenure. But when they finally let him retire, he did this exit interview and he said he worked for so many presidents. And he talked about Jimmy Carter. He was really a good president. He just had too many priorities. And I always said the whole Democratic Party has too many priorities. Can they pick and choose 5 things? And like you said, one is the cost of living. And so when you get local candidates, let's talk about the minimum wage. Let's talk about whatever we can do for the cost of living, however we can get back to some point where we actually can afford rent, health care, food, and daycare. Yeah, let's talk about that. And let's make that priority one. And then I always say education should be either one or two. I talk about public education having a Montessori system across the board in every public education district in the country. Montessori should be an option. It really helps a lot of kids that never prosper in the K through 12 typical system. So I've made that. So just saying those 2 things without going on a giant tangent, if we picked 5 issues and we kind of left abortion out for now, because codifying it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, not enough conservative justices are going to leave the Supreme Court anytime soon for any particular reason. I'm not speculating on any of their ages, their health, or anything. It's just not enough is going to happen. If we just left that out, would that help local candidates?
I think in terms of like a party platform, I don't think it makes sense to like leave it out. What we often talk to our clients about is you've got like one thing you can say to a voter. What is that one thing going to be? Because we just don't, it's like the attention economy. People are scrolling past your ads. They're, sifting through their mail at the table right into the recycling bin. We just don't have the ability to give them a laundry list of things that you want to focus on. So what is the one thing that you really want people to be making their decision about? How do you, and often it's not even a policy or an issue subset. It is like a story you are telling about what's going on and how you differentiate and what is the difference? What's the real contrast? What's at stake here? And I think the sort of least successful campaigns fail in really driving contrast. They fail in if a voter, and that's sort of what I was talking about, Democrats last cycle sort of moved more to the right, sort of trying to moderate and with Trump on the ballot. And what you have is 2 candidates who sort of say the same thing, a Republican and a Democrat, who are kind of mostly in line on what they're talking about, but it's less believable for a Democrat to be saying what they're saying. And so they're just going to vote for the Republican. And so I don't know. It's like we need to, I like to work with candidates who are willing to say something that feels real to people, even if we acknowledge that some people are going to be really turned off by it.
Because like you said, when Democrats say it, Republicans aren't believing it. Like you said, they're going to go Republican. They're not buying in. And then
Right.
Democrats, they're getting a little pissed, some of them. So now you really got a problem there. You've really just alienated about 70% of the vote. The other 30% are independents who probably aren't going to see it your way either. And so that's my point is what would be the one signature item you can connect to the voters? And granted, it's district. There is no one solution for everything. There is no one size fits all solution. But what would be that one thing Democrats should cling to? Like the Republicans always had those few things, the military, the idea that you can either big business will succeed, so will just prosper so much, they're going to pay you a lot, which has never happened. I mean, that's called trickle down. It's just never happened. But there's that belief it could happen. What would be the Democrats' one? What would be your local candidate's one thing? Like I always say, for me, it would be education.
Yeah. I think for me, it really goes back to like where you're running and who you're talking to. So, and what office you're running for, right? Like it would not make sense for a state legislative candidate to make their entire campaign about ending the war in Ukraine, even if that was like the most popular issue for target persuadable voters in their district, right? And so we really need to think about a lot of different variables when we're crafting message, but it has to start with who we're talking to and treating them like a human, not a data point, not someone that responded in a certain way to a very well-crafted polling soundbite. We need to talk in language that people understand, that they connect with, about issues that they care about in the context of the race that you're running in. There's a big picture national party direction problem, but like your local candidate can't solve that problem. Like, you've got to focus on what you can control, which is sort of what your campaign puts out.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's really incredible advice you're giving them. At least stay within your district. Stay within your wheelhouse, within what you can do. Because like you said, when I actually ran against a guy that was literally walking through a lower income community, and he had his little friends following him with a camera, and he said, I'm going to make this promise now. We're going to put a man on Mars. And it's like, you're running for U.S. House of Representatives. I wouldn't even get a vote on him, man. You're just an idiot. But I mean, I hate to say that word so many times, but I do often. But it's just like, even that kind of advice, if Emmett Tupper could really coach 1,000 Democratic candidates and then hopefully get 1,000 new accounts, I mean, that would be great advice to give them. Just stay within your little, what you can do.
Yeah.
And that would.
And in some ways, it's like the contrast piece is important relative to your opponents. But it's also important to think in terms of the sort of national mood. It's possible we're in a wave election for Democrats, and our candidates can kind of ride that wave to the election. But there may be districts and areas where you need to really differentiate from what the party is doing nationally. You need to be a different kind of Democrat.
Yeah, I really think that's great advice. Because then with that comes the fact that if the wave really comes in, you can keep the wave going. Whereas if you just win and then you really don't really win the hearts and minds of them during the 2 years you have in office, you're not going to really accomplish a lot.
Right.
So that's really great advice. So you want to tell about your company before we wrap it up? Just tell us how a candidate can get a hold of you. And
Sure. Yeah. So you can go to our website. There's a contact link where moxiemedia.biz, B-I-Z. We've got an info account. Feel free to reach out. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. We are the first female-founded direct mail firm, at least on the Democratic side, in the country. We work across the country at every level of the ballot.
Oh, that's really great. It's moxiemedia.com. Emma Tupper's the chief executive officer. She's awesome to talk to, as you can tell. That was really great. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great to talk to you as well.
And I'll look forward to doing it again soon. Thanks, Emma. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.